Welcome to the Daily Crossing. We are going to embark today on a project that it's a little bit of a project of the heart. I'm a Catholic. I've been extremely blessed, happy, protected to have been part of the Catholic Church. I'm not just saying that. In many ways, people will say, this situation saved my life, or this person saved my life. I can tell you, and I'm not just saying that. The Catholic Church in many ways saved my life. As a young man, I remember dealing and struggling with so many different concepts, and it was the embrace of the church that helped me gain certain perspectives about life and purpose. And I will tell you, considering my many flaws, I don't know what I would be without it. But what I want to highlight for you is, the role of the papacy, the significance and how important it is for the actual structure of the church. A lot of people, try to understand the church as a church, as an entity. Obviously, is also currently a government. As you know, the Vatican is the smallest government instituted in the planet. And the Pope has been many things in many cases, in many situations, has definitely been a ruler. Has definitely carried some level of kingship, has definitely been the spiritual director and the spiritual foundation for the church. And I want to give you the basis of that. So today what we're going to do is we're going to address the 5 more important popes of the Catholic Church as we explain a little bit the significance of the papacy. And I'll give you the background reading. It's a story in the Bible that goes into people actually Christ is asking, who do they say that I am, right? And he's asking the apostles to give them, it's almost like getting a little bit of feedback. What do they think about me? What do they say? Well, they say that you're a prophet. They say that you might be the incarnation of, they say. And then Christ does something extremely important, right? And it says, who do you say that I am? Right? And Peter goes into a very specific description of Christ. And Christ himself says there is no way that came to you from another man or from a man's perspective. That can only come from God. And it goes into the following formulation. This is the most significant formulation that puts Peter into a very privileged. It's not the question of first among equals. It really is the argument that the Catholic Church makes in terms of the primacy of Peter and the Pope over every single one of the other apostles and any of the other institutions that come from the connection to those apostles. By the way, we love and respect every single one of these entities that are connected to the apostles that walk with Christ, that ate with Christ, that spend time with Him, that learn from Him, that experience His presence. However, when it comes to the divisions that came out of the primacy, it's almost as if a lot of people, not only my Protestant friends, but also my friends that are Orthodox, are willing to ignore this one portion, the significant portion of the Bible. You'll find it on Matthew 16:18, says, and I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades, meaning the gates of hell, will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys, my Orthodox friends. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. And whatever you loose on earth will be loose in heaven. So this is a very important reading because I can't talk about the most important popes of the Catholic Church without going first into who was the first pope. And how is this instituted? Is this something that a lot of people would like to argue? And again, for people that are very selective about the things that they want to read, want to argue that it's a creation of the Catholic Church, that this is not something. The fact of the matter is that not only that Christ comes to build a church according to his own description, upon you I will build my church, it actually chooses the foundational individual. Now, here's the interesting part about Peter and the interesting part about that choice. I think it's safe to say that if you get close enough to the Bible, you realize that some of the other apostles were kinder, maybe a little more intelligent, maybe less emotional. maybe more faithful. Let's remember that Peter is the one apostle that denies Christ 3 times and gets himself into multiple situations that will be considered trouble. But I think there's something very unique about the selection of Peter, because, after the many mistakes that he made and coming across as being the most humane out of all the apostles, right? Meaning showing all his flaws to get to the point of becoming the vicar of Christ. Why that choice? Why that selection out of all of them, right? And that's an important question, because to me, the symbolism behind it, and is argued by many scholars and many people that agree with what I'm about to tell you, that was a meaningful choice, because what was being created, the Church of Christ, is a holy entity. And that holiness connected to that entity will remain as part of the province of Christ himself. This will always be part of the process. However, because there will be human intervention and participation and guidance. And that's what you can claim. Listen, we've seen some horrible popes throughout history. We see some horrible bishops. We see some horrible priests. Well, that is the symbolism and the most minimal part of the presence and the selection of Peter, because Christ had to remind him, I'm actually choosing one that loves me tremendously, but is extremely flawed. And that will be part of the church throughout its history. And as we develop, we have seen that played out over and over again. We had many Peters. A lot of my friends, when I asked them, who do you identify? Who would you like to be as the characters of the Bible? Everybody tells me, man, I want to be Paul. I relate to Paul. I can see Paul. And I tell everybody, guys, I am Peter. I'm the guy that through my actions has denied Christ over and over again. I am probably just as emotional and as flawed. But, he reigned for about 34 to 38 years as the first pope. After that, he was followed by Linus, Pope Linus. But he, is the one that received the title of the Vicar of Christ, meaning the person who represents Christ. And I want to make this very clear. When we're talking about Peter being the first pope, or we talk about the pope being like Peter, that's not the right formulation. Is yes, Peter is the first pope, and the pope, whoever it is, whether it's Pope number 3, number 5, number 265, as we have currently, we say that the Pope is Peter. It's not a question of what is the role. Is precisely assuming the persona of Peter and having the primacy and having the same set of keys, the same set of the right that he has to bind and to turn loose on earth as it is in heaven. And the fact of the matter is that Peter is given that place of privilege. Peter is the first person that Christ goes to after his resurrection. And it's almost as if every step of the way Christ was showing. And I think this is a statement that I read somewhere in Time magazine, which I was extremely surprised about, the beautiful formulation, especially coming out of Time magazine. But it was saying, it's almost as if Christ was willing to believe in Peter more than Peter was willing to believe in himself. That's the symbolism of the choice. With that being said, once we can get that out of the way, I'm going to be a lot lighter when it comes to everybody else that's going to follow. I'm just going to highlight a few things to make them very special. Let me start with Gregory the Great. And Gregory the Great reign, meaning his papacy, lasted from the year 5090 until his passing. Most of the popes will traditionally state as popes until dying. There's only 3 instances where we have either by way of removal or quitting, that we have different situations where popes were no longer popes. But for the most part, somebody becomes a pope and it stays as pope until dying. So 590 to 604, the original name was Gregorius Anicius. He's absolutely known for a number of things. First of all, his missionary work. He is the pope that sends, including St. Augustine, to areas like, the Anglo-Saxon church that we know today was absolutely founded when it comes to Great Britain. This is out of the initiative that is actually established by way of Gregory the Great. We also know him for his music, the Cantus Planus, which is, we know it as the Gregorian chants or the Gregorian music, which still is, by the way, just think about that, from since 590. Prior to that, he just made it a little more official. He was a lover of that music, which we call it, sacred music, as part of the rituals. And today, a lot of beautiful churches, even if they're already part of the new liturgy, you're still going to go into a lot of churches that will incorporate Gregorian music. And then you have, also another big role was a missionary, but also the monastery life. He was a great proponent of the life of prayer, helped, produce many, many locations. From the Gregorian calendar to the Gregorian chants is probably well known. Did so many great things for the church that becomes one of the first individuals that are actually called the Great, right? We have Nicholas the Great, we have Gregory the Great, we have John Paul the Great as one of the recent popes, and we have Leo the Great. So, but Gregory the Great is it's somebody that had an incredible impact, because imagine doing something over 1,500 years ago that still has a relevance in how we practice the faith today. So it had to make the list. Pope number 3, and this is going to be probably a little controversial because some people are for it and some people are not too happy that it actually developed. But when I was saying that the Pope kind of goes into the role of becoming a monarch, and I mean having access to control armies and having access to control military forces. Now we got to go all the way up to Pope Urban II. Urban II, whose name is Eudes of Chatillon, was Pope from 1088, meaning 1088, all the way up to 1099. That's roughly about 11 years as Pope. But the significance of this Pope is that there's two things that I want to highlight about him. First of all is the Crusades. He's the first Pope that officially, even though that was already part of a conversation from the previous Pope, he's the one who officially sends the first crusade, and was by far, until today, history will tell you that it was one of the most successful crusades out of all the crusades that took place. And but it discloses a lot of that capability to be a military power if they wanted to be. An interesting situation is that today the papacies have absolutely nothing to do with an army. There is no expectation that there will be a military attack that will come from any of the popes, and that hasn't been the case for hundreds of years. And the fact of the matter is, the significance of it is to know, when you're talking about a single entity or a single person that has that much power over many people and many countries. And when you're talking about power, is the kind of power that is very difficult to understand for the modern person. You're talking about individuals that have the capability to essentially give countries or make it official for somebody to be the new ruler of a specific territory. The greatest example that I can give you is Brazil itself. The only reason why they speak Portuguese is because that's a territory that was essentially given by one of the popes to the King of Portugal. But the Crusades take place. Some people today will say it is one of the worst things that happened to the Catholic Church. I promise you, unless you haven't done enough research when it comes to the history of the Catholic Church, that is not one of the worst things that happened. As a matter of fact, many of us will argue that was something that was needed. And worse than that, there's a few people that will say today, we probably need a brand new crusade to be taking place out there as a revival of the faith, as a revival of the mission of the Catholic Church, and the responsibility that you have if you happen to be the vicar of Christ, which is essentially to introduce to other people the truth that comes by way of Christ, right? And so now simple statements or phrases that became very popular during the time of the Crusade was, it is the will of God, or God wills it. Deus vult is one of the things that you're going to see a lot in Latin, right? God wills it. And so is one of the things that became very popular. However, the end result of this crusade is a Christian kingdom, a Christian kingdom, was actually set up eventually in Jerusalem, and it is the result of, so Jerusalem, again, for many people, it's probably going to be a little bit of a surprise to even know that at some point there was a Christian kingdom that was based in Jerusalem, and it ruled for many years, up until the point that it was lost again. And that was the purpose of it. The purpose was to somewhere, somehow rescue Jerusalem. It was the purpose of, the responsibility that Christians have to bring the gospels to everyone, especially in those territories. So another thing that I want to highlight when it comes to Pope Urban II was his relationship with the Roman Emperor. Henry IV challenged the position of the Pope, and was a very difficult relationship, to the point of the Pope excommunicating, meaning chastising, separating from the church. That's what the actual act of excommunication is supposed to do. And eventually what ended up happening is Henry IV went to Rome and visit the Pope, who had him waiting outside, and they're talking about being cold and dealing with the snow and just waiting to be able to be forgiven by the Pope. And the significance of that, again, it was a reminder that when it came to who was the ruler of rulers, right? If Christ is the King of Kings, then and the Pope was the vicar of Christ, what eventually became, and it was the case for centuries, and I'm not just talking about a few years, during a great period of time, the Pope, and as a matter of fact, if you look at the creation of the tiara, right, the triple crown, it meant that the Pope was, not only the king of the people, had the ability to rule over people, but also had the ability to rule over kings, the same way Christ has granted him the ability to rule even in heaven. Like, remember the keys, right? Whatever you bind on earth will be bound on heaven. So that, I know that for a lot of people listening to some of these things for the first time, might be a little troubling, and might be definitely something foreign, but it tells you about the significance and the symbolism that sometimes today, is being watered down so much, just trying to have a lot more in common with other religions and other faiths, faith, that it doesn't almost seem to have the same value and the same control that it used to have, the same power, the same authority. Forget about power, right? The authority is that if you have the moral authority to lead other religious institutions and to be the leading voice where everybody have to somewhere somehow follow, that introduces order and better solutions. But let me move on from Pope Urban II to Pope Pius V. He's going to be very much famous for a number of reasons, especially right now that there's a little bit of controversy about the new liturgy that came out of Vatican II. There's always a reference about Pope Pius V, because the so-called Latin Mass, or the Tridentine Mass, which was codified by this Pope. The misunderstanding is that they actually believe that that's the origin of the Mass, right? That when somebody's saying the Mass that was changed was a Mass that was around for over 500 years. The fact of the matter is that that Mass was around a lot longer. He just took the steps to codify it, meaning for the purpose of duplication and for the purpose of having a more uniform way of doing it, they took something, they dated back from the date of what we call apostolic times to obviously the first Middle Age years of the papacy, going all the way to Pope Pius V, who was a ruling pope from 1566 to 1572. And his name was Antonio Grizielletti. One of the reasons why he's probably known the most is because of the Mass, because of what we call the Latin Mass, the Tridentine Mass. I have to name it just because today, again, when we were talking about Gregory the Great and the Gregorian chants, right? One of the things that ended up making this Mass extremely beautiful, especially after it was codified, is those Gregorian chants were part of the Mass. The act of adoration was highlighted, and veneration, the act of adoration and veneration was highlighted to the point where there was no misunderstanding that what the priest was trying to do during those days was to lead everybody in a single direction. Imagine if I'm the person leading a group, right? We're going to go visit somewhere, and I'm the tour guide, right? I'm the person who's going to be leading the group, and so obviously everybody is following me. So the misguided idea when people look at the Latin Mass and say, well, but the priest has given his back to the people almost most of the time during the Mass. Yes, if you don't understand what's actually taking place, that's the way you will read into it. But the way you got to see it is that Mass was designed so the priest that was actually celebrating the Mass was leading everybody towards something sacred, towards Christ, towards the opening of the divine when it came by way of celebrating the Mass. So what everybody was supposed to do was to follow the lead of the priest that was presiding, follow the lead of the priest that had the responsibility to guide everyone towards proximity to Christ and towards heaven. So, beautiful Mass today. Interesting enough, even though there's a lot of controversy between the new Mass and the old Mass, the fact of the matter is that they both belong to the Church. I know there's a lot of positions that would like to reject one or the other. I will always submit myself to the will of the Church, so I will accept one the same way that I accept the other. No different than what Pope Benedict XVI said. The Mass of the ages, or the Mass that was good for so many centuries and over a millennia, still is good for us. And so I'm respectfully, not only, I will say, promoting the idea that if you get the chance, take the time to visit one of those beautiful Masses, the Quo Primum, that is what kind of codified or gave it that position. The Mass of the Ages, the Latin Mass, the Tridentine Mass, is connected to Pope Pius V. He was also known as the Pope of the Holy Rosary. He was very devoted to Our Lady of the Rosary, so he was the Pope of the Rosary, kind of made it more official every step of the way. And the last Pope that I'm going to mention to you out of these 5 popes is John Paul II, John Paul the Great. Saint John Paul II was elevated to saint the moment that he died. Immediately there were people showing up to the Vatican with many signs, saints, santos, subito, meaning essentially promoting his ascension to be named as a saint. He was a pope that presided from 1978 all the way up to 2005. The second longest presiding pope in history. For about 27 years he was a pope. His original name was Karol Wojtyla, a Polish pope. What that means is, and by the way, important to highlight where he was born, because for a period of over 400 years, we have only Italian popes. So he was the first non-Italian for over 400 years that the Church was opening up to the doors. Opening the doors to a pope that was outside of Italy. Since then, we had a German, and today we have an Argentinian pope, which means that the College of Cardinals is a lot more diverse. The selection of a new pope will more than likely, it's going to take some time if it ever goes back to having an Italian pope, even though right now, today, we have some phenomenal archbishops and cardinals, especially the cardinals that have the ability to participate in the role of being selected as popes. We have phenomenal people, phenomenal Italians that will make great popes. But here's a couple of things that you want to know. This is a pope that grew up under the abuses of communism. We can go back to the after effect of World War II. Russia obviously expanded his position, what eventually becomes the Soviet Union. Poland is part of that formation. They are essentially dominated, controlled by that ruling force. Communism was something that he was able to witness closely, was able to experience part of it. The second thing that I want to highlight during that period of time, he also experienced the Holocaust. This is a pope that, outside of Peter and some of the initial foundational popes, is probably the one pope that has the closest relationship to real Jews. I mean, he grew up, his landlord was a Jew, his friends were Jewish. This was somebody who actually had the ability to experience Jews not just as the people of the book or people of the Bible, but he actually had the ability to share with them, experience with them, and was able to understand how they practiced their relationship with God. By the way, I will say that probably one of the closest friends, as a pope, one of the closest friends to the Jews, making officially, a lot of statements that would be pro-normalizing the relationships between Catholics and Jews, essentially somewhere, somehow, almost imposing the responsibility to Christians about becoming quasi-protectors of Jews. And a lot of people will find the statement a little controversial, but if you look back a little bit and you see the new relationship, going to the point of literally calling them our elder brothers or older brothers, creating literally, immediately, not only a relationship that we describe as Christianity emerging out of Judaism, right? The Messiah that they were waiting for. Well, Christ is the Messiah that was to come. And again, from God to Christ to Peter. That is the line of descendancy. But this is a pope that's literally saying the older brothers, our older brothers that we got to remain in relationship with. So it's binding that relationship, taking it to a whole different level that most people probably didn't consider. Spoke about 13 different languages, I believe about 16 dialects, was able to communicate, read just about every document. And every pope is actually described in terms of what is the style of the pope. So somebody will say a pope was more of a theologian than meaning theology was first, then was philosophy, and then was what they call it a pastoral pope, right? And so in the case of John Paul II, philosophy was first. If you look at his style of writing, it was very philosophical. I was very surprised to see his Splendor Veritatis being very similar to the writings of Miguel de Unamuno in terms of the I that I am, or the I of the individual, which Pope John Paul II describes as the divine presence within us, right? And the Sanctum Sanctorum, the many, it dives in a way that I never seen described by any other pope before or ever since. I think it was like I said, a very philosophical. Yeah, it is something that I haven't seen done by any previous pope, and it's something that I haven't seen since him, since his writing, being extremely philosophical. And by the way, that makes it a lot easier for a lot of people that don't want to read documents just from a religious perspective. As a matter of fact, he is one of the popes that kind of forced the dialogue between faith and reason, and did it in a way that was able to say that it's okay to approach a single perspective from both sides of, again, faith and reason, and challenge everyone to find a common ground especially if the overall idea was to find some level of goodness. One of the other things that I want to highlight to you about John Paul II, first of all, being the Pope, that I can spend 3 hours on John Paul II just because I grew up under his papacy. Every single Catholic will tell you which Pope they grew up under, right? I'm going to have, God willing, if I'm granted life, I will have other popes that will be part of my life. I've had friends that are a little older than me that talk about the papacy of Paul VI, or they can go all the way back to Pius XII, and that means that it's somebody that is obviously much older, because now we're bypassing John 23rd altogether. So Pius XII and Paul VI being the popes prior to John Paul II, because John Paul I, because you're probably wondering, wait a minute, so what happened? So only presided, unfortunately, for 33 days. What's important for me to highlight in terms of the transition between Paul VI and John Paul II is that there's a major change and shift that is taking place to the foundational structure of the church, which is Vatican II. The Conciliar Council of Vatican II is probably, as a matter of fact, is for whatever reason is referred to as the council, right? And we have so many other councils throughout the history of the church. But the fact of the matter is, he's the Pope who presided and who have to preside over the changes of the council, which is not an easy thing to do, was highly criticized for changes to the liturgy, ecumenism, a lot of all the things that were related to what people call the challenges of the teachings of Vatican II. A lot of people that would argue that had a negative impact when it comes to vocations, the declining in certain areas of the church, ended up, seeing losses, schools shutting down, high schools shutting down, churches shutting down. So the decline of the faith, and that unfortunately during that time also, there was also some, as much as he was able to reach out to a lot of the other ecumenical churches, they established a great relationship with the Orthodox Church, but unfortunately, internally, a lot of the issues that were taking place were highly criticized about how they were handled, especially if you're talking about entities like SSPX and Monsignor Lefebvre. However, there's no doubt about it that this man loved the church tremendously. And there's so many reasons for it, not only his life of service, definitely a saintly man. A lot of people highlighted the way he will dive into prayer. Was very evident that he was a man that loved prayer tremendously. It was also a great communicator, and it's also somebody that experienced personally great losses. His mother passes away when he's only 6 years old. His brother passes away when he's about 11 years old, 11, 12 years old. And then his father passes away also at a very young age. So essentially, he becomes a young man who actually wrote poetry. This book is called The Place Within, and it talks about the poetry of Pope John Paul II. He had a nickname, but there was a lot of the poetry that he wrote was under Lolek, and that was the nickname that was actually given. But there's two beautiful poems. One of them is actually dedicated to his mother. I want to share it with you because there's something very unique about the way he's writing, and it's called Over This Your White Grave. And it goes something like this. Over this your white grave, the flowers of life in white, so many years without you. How many have passed out of sight? Again, is complaining about not having the presence. It's almost as if even though he lost his mother at a very young age, he's still yearning by that maternal presence. It's very obvious that he's describing the fact that it's something that he still misses, right? And he goes on to say, over this your white grave, covered for years, there is a stir in the air, something of lifting, and like death beyond comprehension. Over this your white grave, and here comes a question. It says, oh mother, can such loving cease? It's almost as if, again, the pain of, you got to choose how you want to read into that question. Of mother, can such loving cease? Is he complaining about the pain that he still feels? Is he just yearning for the presence of his mother? But almost again, as a great person of faith, immediately, it's almost like he realizes that he's allowing something about his way of processing this information that is not supposed to be. And he says, goes on to say, for all his filial adoration, as a son, a prayer. So give her eternal peace. This was written in Krakow, Poland, spring of 1939. I will highly recommend it. It's a beautiful, beautiful poetry. Like I said, one of the most unique things about this man was his style of writing. Connected me to the church for so many different reasons. It was through history, it was through reason that I was able to embrace the foundation of being a Catholic. Obviously, there's so many other popes that we can highlight, and we'll maybe go back to highlighting a few more, and we'll maybe do a part 2 of the greatest popes of the Catholic Church and Catholic history. But here are the 5 first popes that we wanted to introduce you. If you have anybody or any comments about any of the popes that you became familiar, or the pope that you grew up into, or a specific document that had an impact in your life that still is a guiding principle, whether you agree with the modern popes, which again, John Paul II, John Paul the Great, or Saint John Paul the Great, John Paul II, is the only modern pope that I decided to include in this conversation. All the other popes, starting with Peter to Leo the Great, to Urban II, to, needless to say, Pius V, was the popes that we believe you needed to know something about so you can better understand the overall structure of the Catholic Church. I'm deeply grateful if you're listening to this message. Like I said, it's a project of the heart. And I know that many of you who love history and who also love the Catholic Church, or just want to understand a little bit about why exactly it operates the way it operates, how was the foundational process, and why did it become such a big institution. Today we are over 1 billion Catholics out there, and probably, God willing, will continue to grow to be the representation of Jesus Christ. If you like it, just comment, pass it around, share it with some friends. Let us know if there's anybody specifically that you would like us to highlight, or give us your opinion about, the greatest popes or any of the greatest religious individuals that you are familiar with that we can possibly, potentially highlight for you. Thank you so much for listening, and looking forward to seeing you in our next conversation. Thank you.